Hello learners, welcome to the course Migrated Women's Literature. In our today's lecture, we will be talking about migrant women and literature. As is evident that Indian diasporas were formed substantively during the British colonial rule when the large chunks of the population were moved to various locations from Africa to the Americas primarily for developing agriculture there. These were people from the lowest sections of the society who were mostly illiterate, even for communicating with their families, and this was really few and far between kind. They had to depend on others to write for them. Thus, there were hardly any accounts of their lives there, factual or fictional, to begin with, since they could not read or write. Also, in the initial phase of their diasporic lives, they were too busy grappling with the problems of settling down to think of writing. Thus, what we call as Indian diasporic writing is a much later phenomenon, mostly of the 20th century, when the next generation or even one thereafter, having received their education, either stayed put or moved again from there to England or the USA or Canada, thereby creating situations that have been called, among others, double diaspora. Also, the next wave of Indians who decided to move abroad and make home there were educated, mostly professionals, who knew not only to wield a pen but also to wield it in a manner to win international recognition. S.S. Dhami from Canada was perhaps one of the earliest diasporic writers whose novel Maluka, based on his own life story, captured the struggles of early Indian settlers in Canada. Maluka is a sensitive portrayal of Indian immigrants, in fact, early Indian immigrants, mostly Punjabi, in North America. It is an authentic story of those whose voice is rarely heard in our dominant discourse. First part of Maluka was published in 1978. It was translated into Punjabi by Vancouver Saath and published in 1988 by Balraj Sahni, Yadgar Prakashan, Amritsar. The Punjabi edition was so enthusiastically received in Punjab and by the Punjabi community in Canada that the author was encouraged to complete its sequel, Maluka Part 2nd, in February 1989. Professor Sadhu Singh did the Punjabi rendering of the original English manuscript Maluka Part 2nd. Maluka, incorporating the two parts, was published in India in 1993 under the Punjabi Art Association, Edmonton, Canada. The two Punjabi editions helped in widening its readership and in providing due recognition to this fictional work. At the same time, it was felt in literary circles that the original English version needs to be made available to the English readers, especially the young growing English readership. The novel, however, did not gain much international recognition. It is only with writers like V.S. Naipaul, Salman Rushdie and M.G. Vasanji that Indian diasporic writing came on its own, and the world suddenly woke up to the significance of the contribution to English literary scene. An Area of Darkness, Midnight's Children and The Gunny Sack are their respective initial narratives that brought them fame and set up a subgenre titled Indian diasporic writing. Later, however, many more names were added to the list, like Rohinton Misri being a prominent one. It may be of interest to note here that all the names mentioned here are of male writers, thereby adding the gender dimension to the Indian diasporic writing. It is as if no women with Indian connections wrote from foreign locations. Well, this is by and large true, and for good reasons. As is mentioned, most of the early persons to migrate out of India to different locations across the globe were males. It is therefore only natural that first attempts to create literature by Indian immigrants be by males. Also, because when it came to educating their next generations on their new locations, the Indians preferred male offsprings over girl children. The reasons, therefore, are similar to the reasons for the late entry and blooming of writing by women in India, as well whether in Indian languages or in English. However, once they began writing, they made up for the late start, and by now there is a large body of diasporic writing by women of Indian origin. Some of them, like their male counterparts, have carved out a niche for themselves. Anita Desai and Kamla Markandeya were among the earliest women diasporic writers from India who gained international recognition. Later, of course, Bharti Mukherjee, Kiran Desai, Meena Alexander, Jhumpa Lahiri, Uma Parmeswaran, Suniti Namjoshi, Sunetra Gupta, Samina Ali, and Chitra Banerjee Devakaruni became well known on the women's writing scene internationally. When we examine their writings, poems, plays, stories, or longer fiction, we find that these are different from their male counterparts. That is, Indian diasporic male writers, not only in terms of themes but also in terms of style of narration, including the choice of metaphors and similes, etc. Let us now look at, as a sample, some stories by women writers from Canada who trace their roots to India. Indian diasporic women writers from Canada have preferred to write in the genres of poetry and stories, although a number of them have written longer fiction as well as plays. Like their male counterparts, they have themes of alienation, discrimination, ethnicity, cultural conflict, nostalgia, and memory woven into their writings, but most of these have an overriding aspect, namely that of double dependence, as an immigrant and as a woman. Thus, there is a gender spin to their writings. Thus, these writers show how even in their treatment of themes dealt with by males also, their treatment and message is different because their ideological stance and worldview is different. Let us talk about the term gender. The word gender has its various facets. It is not something we are born with, rather what we do or how we behave. It becomes our gender. The society has created some set norms which are gender specific. When the term gender is used in common parlance, it is perceived to be meaning feminine or referring to female or even as an equivalent of feminism. However, this is not the case. As Jasbir Jain explains, two systems of knowledge and two sets of cultural influences construct identity, and the socio-economic reality of both the societies confronts the self. So, gender in fact is a term that refers to both males and females and is the defining term for difference in perception by males and females. It is true that men and women have different experiences. This is because of both nature and nurture. This is to say, because of their different biological functions, their experience of life is different. Secondly, because of the different roles they perform in societal functioning, working in different spheres of life assigned to them by their specific social organization, they also have different experiences. Or, let's put it this way, males and females perceive reality, events, etc. differently. And as a corollary, they perceive the human reality differently, and as a consequence of that, they also interpret it differently. In short, thanks to gender, male and female narrations are different. They provide different contexts to them from their experiences, thereby presenting them differentiating in their narrations. Let us discuss some examples by these Indian diasporic female writers. Since different societies treat males and females differently as to the distribution of power and privileges in a more nuanced argument, we can say that gender narration, while remaining universal at the level of nature, becomes society or community specific due to nurture. This course, therefore, is gender specific as well as society specific, with either gender negotiating the same reality differently, as it applies to all kinds of discourses, from personal to political, factual to fictional, and to any other kind in between. Let us now look at Indian diasporic writing and writing by Indian diasporic women, as also discuss a couple of stories by Indian Canadian women writers. For this discussion, I have chosen the anthology Her Mother's Ashes and Other Stories, which is edited by Noor Jahan Aziz. In this anthology, there are 20 stories, 10 each from Canadian women writers and women writers from USA. There are two stories with similar themes: diasporic women experiencing double alienation, that of diaspora and an unhappy marriage with both enmeshed. In both, the protagonist women seek unusual solutions of running away from home in sheer desperation without caring for the consequences. Commenting on the stories in general, they show some aspects of the gendered divide in narration. All narratives, without exception, are either first-person narrations by female protagonists or in the authorial voice, which is female again. Not even one narrative shows women happy in their diasporic space, without the exception of Yasmin Ladha's story, about which it is difficult to discern if she is portraying a happy woman. There is this story, Freeze Frame. The story is about a group of women of Indian origin who get together occasionally to celebrate their liberation from men, like divorce, etc. The present occasion discussed in this story is the news of the splitting of Sunda and Mahesh. They sing a song of liberation for her and raise a toast for her. It is a story with a very novel theme indeed. Difficult to imagine a male writer choosing such a theme and treating the way Uma Parmeswaran deals with it, which presents women's consciousness by celebrating splitting from husband and family. Another story is Altered Dreams, which is written by Lakshmi Gill. The case of Lakshmi Gill is quite different from other diasporic women who write and whose roots go back to India. Different from even those whom we call cases of double diaspora. Her family had migrated to Philippines, where she was born to an Indian father and a Spanish mother. Gill migrated to Canada later on. Gill, in her story, exposes the myth that it is all democratic and gender-friendly environment in the developed world as compared to the developing world. The prejudice of the husband against his wife's career pursuits, his parents supporting their son's point of view, and the husband threatening to ruin her family life with a divorce are all that one would have normally expected in a third world situation. The final message being there is no gender justice even in those societies that claim to have achieved it. For today's discussion, there is this, as we can say, a poem or a fable by Suniti Nam Joshi. The title is Glass Coffins. Suniti Nam Joshi, a South Asian Canadian poet, she has written it. Here she has portrayed the story of Snow White in totally different and unique colors. As she writes, there were two glass coffins, the prince was in one and Snow White in the other, and though the sun glared and the leaves fell, the glass was undamaged. They were like pretty marionettes in cellophane wrappers waiting to live, and the dwarfs were not miners. They were cybernetic experts, wise wiremen doing their damnedest to trigger the dream. Then a thought leaped an arc, a sudden impulse. Cuff up that apple. Snow White cuffs. Break through the glass. Her fist crashes. The dream begins. Stepping so gingerly, so timidly on grass, she approaches the prince. He has snow white hair. This is no prince. This is the king. He died in his sleep. She buries him. Then cuff up that apple. Snow White cuffs. Break through the glass. Had she time to consider, she might prefer not to dream. So here we see the lines, cuff up that apple, break through the glass. Here Suniti Namjoshi is asking Snow White, the protagonist, to cuff up that apple and free herself from that spell. She also says that the present day Snow White does not need a prince to free herself from that spell. She is capable enough to break that glass ceiling. Here she has presented the story in totally unique colors. She questions, why should Snow White wait for the prince to come and rescue her from that poisoned apple? Instead, her Snow White would cuff up that apple and would break that glass coffin so that she could save herself. The story is told with a feminist approach. Here, Snow White needs no prince to save her. She is capable of saving her life. Another example is from the poem Letter to a Prospective Immigrant, which is written by Lakshmi Gill. The poet is concerned with the problem of adjustment which is demanded from a brown wife with a white husband. She writes, here the body must deny nature, stay virginal or abort, no womb issues. Households are mad, in league with perverse witches, cripples and wild dogs. So, the brown wife is expected to fulfill all the commitments. Lakshmi Gill weaves several metaphors into her poems as she uses different symbols as well. She here talks about the laws and says that there are no laws for an unborn girl. So Lakshmi Gill's poem Letter to a Prospective Immigrant would be discussed in detail in the lectures to come. Similarly, we would also be talking about Suniti Namjoshi's fable Glass Coffins in some other lectures. The literature has always been interpreted in various terms. One is based upon gender. There are two ways of criticizing something, be it any form of art. That is from the perspective of a man and a woman. Men and women interpret literature differently because their caption worldviews are different and their perception of reality is different. Therefore, their perception of the imagined world literature is also different. This then is how diasporic discourse by women writers of Indian origin has been constructed. That is all for today's lecture. We will connect again in some other lectures. Thank you.